I'm so excited to announce another episode of our Pre-Symposium panel as we ramp up for our executive symposium next week, February 15th, exactly a week from today, 5 to 8 p.m. in Austin, Texas, on the topic, how to build a culture of accountability. We're going to be chatting about what we can do to build a culture of accountability. How can we go about empowering team members on our team to hold other people accountable? And really, I think one of my favorite topics within this is like empowering others within the organization. And I say this, and I think like we often talk about empowering others in an organization as like a lot of fodder and like a lot of marketing and a lot of like, keynote speeches and that sort of thing. But like, what does that actually mean in practice? And by that, I just mean, how can we overcome the natural psychological tendency that objectivity diminishes with hierarchy? Essentially, how can we go about empowering people lower in the organization to call out someone senior in the organization if they're practicing behaviors that are not conducive to the business's success? We've got three great leaders that are here with us today to talk about how to build a culture of accountability. We've got Chris, we've got Mindy, we've got Raghu. I'd love for each of you all to introduce yourselves before we dive into the topic. Chris, you mind going first?
No problem. Good morning. Name is Chris Jackson. I'm the global head of talent acquisition for Confluent Medical Technologies.
Very cool.
Hey, I'm Mindy Honcoop. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Garrett. And I am a fractional people leader and advisor with Agile and HR.
Hello, everyone. This is Raghunath Sapuram. So happy to be here with you all. I am the CEO for TLX North America. TLX is a global training institute for wellness and resilience and leadership skills development in organizations, corporations.
Very cool. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. So let's dive into the topic, how to build a culture of accountability. So Chris, Mindy, Raghu, I'd love to learn your thoughts just in your experiences within the corporate world and within the organizations that you've worked with so far. What have you found to be effective in terms of building a culture of accountability, and what have you found to be ineffective? I guess really, how can we disseminate between what is like fodder and like corporate speak and like, everybody's like hopped up on the Kool-Aid versus like actual practice and where there's egos left at the door and people can actually be like, oh my gosh, even though I'm a senior VP and you're just a, analyst or whatever in the organization, you called me out on something and you were right and I was wrong and I acknowledge that. And like together as an organization, we become better for it. Like, what have you found to be, where do you see a nice delineation between like actual practice versus just talk? Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Yeah, jump in, Raghu.
So, personally, I don't like the word accountability. Let me start out by saying that. Accountability brings a feeling of punishment, a feeling of, I'm going to be held responsible for the mistakes I make. Accountability is really about ownership, right? Or really about and giving recognition and reward when it comes out right, and learning from the mistakes when it doesn't come out right. So that I feel is the biggest thing. So in our company, we had tried different techniques, right? Measurement tools and open door policy for the executives, different tools. And end of the day, it's the people who really matter. So working one-on-one with the people, the permeating a culture of, like in a startup, I was part of a startup for like 12 years and built the company from 0 to 165 people before we got acquired. So we saw different stages of growth. And the early stages, it's easier for founders and others to be involved in people's lives, right? And just be with them and hold themselves accountable and inspire that accountability from employees. And as the company grows, that becomes more and more of a challenge, right? So that then has to be a culture, which is, at the team level, at organization lead level, that culture has to permeate. So we can talk more about this, but that's where I see there is formal techniques like smart goal setting, OKRs. We have tried the whole work, agile frameworks, Scrum, all these kind of things. And end of the day, it's people to people. This is how I see accountability.
I believe accountability really starts with leadership really modeling behavior of what that looks like. And I agree. I don't see it as something that's punitive. I believe it in really giving employees the ownership to be able to be creative and be themselves. But at the same time, knowing that there are leaders in the organization that will admit when things do not go right and take accountability for them and try to rally the troops, so to speak, I think it gives employees that ability to see that in real life practice, and then they have the confidence to go out and when things don't go right, to really own up to it. But again, to be solution oriented, to come up with solutions to find the answer.
And yes, and because all of that is so good. It's also, and Raghu and Chris kind of touched on this, but just to kind of speak to it even clearer is clarity and alignment across the executive team down to that individual contributor. And it's about also, are you clear and articulating things as an executive team and as a leader? And is that message are those goals or those objectives, is there a level of clarity? Are they being said in a consistent way? Are people being rewarded, or are they being coached against those in a consistent way? And then the culture, is there clarity and consistency of culture? And that is, it's what Raghu is saying. That's how we show up every day. People are like, what is culture really? And it's really like how we do life together. How do we do work together? And the companies that have really consistently codified, what does it look like to successfully come here and work together? What does that actually look like? And weave it into the processes, weave it into the frameworks and the tools that you're using. A tool is only as good as the mindset or of the behavior change that has to come along when adopting that new tool within that clarity of culture, to the clarity of the goals and the expectations. But then underlying all of that, if there is no trust, if there's no room or mindset for failure, if there is no ability to have courageous conversations together, then we're not going to be able to learn and to sharpen each other, because we are messy humans. We're going to mess up, and we need to be able to have a safe place to be able to speak through that, and how can we do better together next time.
That's a really interesting point, Mindy. I want to elaborate on that because I think there's one thing that we've seen a lot lately, especially over the last handful of months and probably really the past year, is a lot of companies are making layoffs, and so many people are shocked and surprised. They're like, oh my gosh, this came out of nowhere. And when I hear that, I think to myself, there's probably a big disconnect in the culture, because there's probably a group of people up top who are like, okay, we are bleeding cash in this area, and our pain threshold is this much. At this juncture, once we have this much left in the bank, we have got to pull the plug, rip off the Band-Aid, and move in a different direction. But it seems like not everybody in the organization knows that those are the financial constraints that the organization is being faced with. And so the question I have is, when it comes to consistency of culture, when it comes to clarity and alignment, Mindy, to your point, how can we go about creating incentives where we can align everybody together in the organization, where we can have that clarity? And so when a decision is made, there isn't really a ton of surprise. It's like, hey, we've unfortunately been bleeding cash in this department for years, as you can see by our balance sheets. I'm just saying a hypothetical, but like, if you look at the balance sheets, unfortunately, we are bleeding cash right now. We cannot continue to operate in this way. If in 3 months we're not able to become a little more profitable or raise our revenues or decrease our costs in these areas, we might have to make some changes. Like, I don't know, it seems like that would be a way to align the culture and get that clarity and alignment together. But it's also really hard, because I think a lot of organizations think like, oh my gosh, if I'm transparent and open and clear, I'm going to ring the alarm bells. Everyone's going to go crazy, and everyone's going to start leaving and quitting. So how do you, I guess, what are your thoughts on this? It's a leading question, but I'm curious to know, like, what have you found to be effective in terms of creating the right incentives so then people can be aligned with the culture, especially when it's like hard decisions have to be made? Like, I think it's easy to have everybody aligned when like everyone's making money hand over fist, but when hard decisions have to be made, how do we still retain alignment and clarity?
And Garrett, I think, and I was in an organization where, and it was very much a transparent organization. And what I loved about that organization was the level of leadership, but it's about always testing the communication plan, that business strategy, who's in our audience, and like, how are we thoughtful about the level of communication that we're bringing, and how are we bringing that? Because we don't want it to also come from a place of fear, but also a place, of clarity of like, if, for example, in 3 months, if we don't hit X, Y, or Z, these are the things. But if we think that we can do this, here's some of the things that we're going to try in order that we are hopeful that we are going to make it. And because there is that scarcity mindset that says if we're transparent with everyone, they'll leave. But if this is a great place to work, if you've built a culture of awesomeness and you have trust and you have clarity at that level of communication, the people that are going to thrive in that and are going to be able to be kind of tested and stand up and say, yes, I'm going to take the challenge. You have given me clarity of what I need to do. I'm going to go do it. Those are the ones that are going to stay. Those that maybe are going to opt out, we're going to like hold you back. They were going to be the ones that maybe weren't all in. And there's also the pros and cons to weigh, right? This is not like Mindy's saying this and this is exactly what you should go do. There's so many factors involved. But often I find when you do have a level of that transparency, then the employee base is clear. They're bought in because they feel that you trusted them. They are loyal. They're there for a reason. They're there because they felt called to be in this workplace and to have a sense of purpose. And also when you don't have that level of clarity, people fill in usually a worse story.
And I feel on the individual level, on the team level, it is very important in those, you have that communication, that clarity about the business, is to understand what your role is in terms of the success of that organization. I think a lot of times organizations, when you hear these announcements and you look, then in your particular world, you're saying, okay, I have nothing to do with this. But I think it's very important when we get back to goal setting is for those department managers or department heads to really let those employees understand what their role is in the success of the organization. I feel that when you have that as something that is driving you, then when you tend to understand when things where things are, and then again coming up with solutions as to what you can do to really change that tide. A lot of times it could be very little, but I think understanding what your role is, what your team's role is in the overall successful organization, I think makes a big difference when those communications come out.
And that's like so true, Christopher. It's like really thinking about with you have a business strategy, do you have the right level of communication, planning, and cadence? So if you are going through this, like, are your leaders finding out first? Do they have time to process it? Do they have time to ask questions to understand how do I now communicate this down to my team? Because that manager needs to understand their role in it before they're then expected to go and speak that down to a lower level.
Absolutely.
I think the strategies, while I agree that this alignment is key and transparency is key, right? And it's fully agree with that. I worked in large companies, multinational global companies, as well as startups, as I mentioned earlier. And the strategies have to be different because in a startup world, people know that the jobs may go away anytime. Funding may run out, right? Or if one big client goes away, it's a major risk for the company. So transparency is still very key in the startup world. I found like my own CEO did a great job in terms of keeping people informed on, hey, this client is going away, we are losing this client and it poses a risk for us. But also coming up with what are the strategies I'm going to follow to preserve your employment, or maybe not directly addressing that, but to address to that point, what are the things I'm doing to manage through this challenge, right? So I think they appreciate the transparency and the honesty. Then like the Chris and Mindy were saying, then there's no mistrust and doubt that creeps in people's mind, because once that comes in, it's very hard to back up from there. In larger companies, like I was with IBM, the financials are very clear, right? I mean, they're published for the most part. But still, I find that the general managers have a major influence on how the organization understands whether management is transparent and whether they can trust management, right? And And I lived in the IT world, so finding a job is not that difficult. It goes through ups and downs, but it's relatively easy in other worlds. So I would be curious to see how in the manufacturing industry, how that would play out, the transparency and what happens, right?
I would say in this climate, especially what's been happening in the last couple of years with layoffs, employees are very smart about this now and are asking those questions. It may have snuck up on pros, I think, a couple of years ago, but with what's been going on in the industry, employees are asking the questions as to, hey, I see this downturn in the market. I see that we hit our revenue goals, but not where we really want to be. What does that mean for me? So I think based on what's going on, those conversations are happening a lot more, which I think is a good thing.
So, Chris, Raghu, Mindy, you bring up really interesting points. Mindy, you bring up a really interesting point about how to get people to rally around adversity and coming with transparency. And it actually seems like there might be an opportunity to rumble. I'm in the middle of reading Dare to Lead from Brene Brown, and so I'm loving this term rumble. But it seems like there could be an opportunity to rumble around this concept of clarity or not clarity. Raghu, you brought up this point of like, okay, in a startup environment, it's really hard to work back from doubt and potentially painting a picture of doubt. Whereas, Mindy, you bring up this interesting point of like, hey, when you people adversity, some people will wither and die on the vine and say, I'm getting out of here. But some people will lean into that adversity and say, you know what, screw it. I want to do what I can to make this work. I guess let's rumble about it. What I'd be curious to learn the differing perspectives and the thoughts. I like to, by the way, have disagreement on my panel, so I want to see differing perspectives, Raghu and Mindy, from this, and see if we can get further insights on this. Who wants to go first to elaborate on their point?
Yeah, I can maybe touch on trust and doubt, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tag back into my own experiences and see for example, if you are working with a senior person in the organization, and trust and distrust can happen in many fronts. It's not just about the work and the goals and all the SMART goals that we have set up and all the OKRs that we have set up and so on. It could be simply like, how much equity did I promise you? How much did I actually give you? And how much is that equity worth? What did I communicate at the time of you coming on board? And it's going to be worth it? And did it translate that way or not at this point in time? And there can be a lot of mistrust coming from that piece. And the same is true in the startup world. You did all these promises and the glories, and then as things go up and down, then the variabilities come in. So it's like absolutely critical to be honest and say like, hey, this is what we thought it's going to be, and this is where we are now, right? And let's see how to go through this process. So to me, the mistrust and trust, that balance, that equation is an ongoing thing that we have to keep working on.
That's interesting. Okay, Mindy, I would love to learn your thoughts on that, because I think Raghu brings up a really interesting point. I think, like, especially in a lot of small businesses and startups where we're offering equity to team members, it can be easy to become enraptured in visions of grandeur. Like, if we, take off like a rocket ship like Facebook, this many shares would be worth $1 billion come 5 years from now. So, like, keep working at it, and you could be a billionaire. But like, what percentage of businesses actually become the next, Facebook, Uber, Amazon, Google, whatever you may be. But yeah, so I guess how do you? I think Raghu brings up an interesting point about the issue between optimism and transparency. What are your thoughts on that, Mindy?
Well, for me, like when we're speaking with leaders, and like this usually would happen if in a recruitment process, and in with recruiters that may be speaking to it, but also ongoing. Yes, things can change, but it's about speaking yes, we are optimistic. I mean, it's being clear on this is what we're hoping for. We don't know, like based on my past experience, maybe that founder started several companies that were very successful. You know, you have all the ingredients for a recipe for success, but in the land of startup, anything is possible, right? And I think especially if you're speaking, knowing the audience you're speaking to, if this is a college graduate, if this is their first time entering the workforce and they don't even know what equity is, you know, maybe, you know, we need to paint a really clear picture. We need to educate. We need to create awareness. We always need to really have a moment to take a step back and think about, okay, I have a talk track, but who am I speaking to? Like, I need to be able to communicate the right level of information to the audience I'm speaking to. And if it's a young college graduate, maybe I go less on the optimism, lean into education, and really be like, this could happen. And you could give them ranges. This is what I also like to do. You know, if, you know, everything, if it was a perfect world, this is where it could be. But most likely, you know, middle of the range, it could be like this, you know, but this is where we're at right now. But let me give you some possibilities. You know, I think if you're entering into the world of startup, you know, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lack of clarity. It's a lot of gray, and you have to really like that space. You have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to succeed in a place that doesn't have a lot of clear direction. And that's not for everyone. I think that's also an understanding who's going to thrive in this workplace, who's going to work really well here and hire to that. But I do think that when we are speaking to things that we can't guarantee, I always say be really careful with the words we use. Words are important, and we can never guarantee anything. We can never guarantee anyone's job. We can't guarantee even like the equity, for example, and benefits are always changing too. So you can't guarantee those are going to be the same year over year. So we have to be careful in how we speak, and really take time to talk with people. I think we're hasty. I think we often like will jump in and we forget to have that level of moment of care of where is this person coming from and how do I communicate this message.
And Mindy, what you're bringing up is a point that I think I'm bringing back to one of Chris's points earlier. But Mindy, what you're bringing up is this concept of repetition. I think as leaders, we think that, oh, we've said it once, so everyone should be, all right, I said it to this person. It should disseminate throughout the entire organization. I said it to one person. They're the communications person at our company. Everyone should know. I shouldn't have to repeat myself. Chris, you brought up a really interesting point about getting middle managers clear on the strategy. Like, we might make a decision as an executive team, but then disseminating that out throughout layers of the organization goes to the layers of middle management. How do you go about, to Mindy's point, of giving people ranges of, well, I guess there's a couple of questions within this. One, how do you go about like assessing whether or not middle managers fully comprehend and understand why the strategy is being built? I think like a lot of people are yes people, and like you tell them something like, oh yeah, for sure, I got it, boss. And you're like, wait, what did she just say? And I think that happens a lot. And then the other component is, how do we go about painting a picture for those in the entire organization as to like, hey, if rosy pictures are ahead of us, this is like the high outcome. Here's what we think on the average side is going to happen. And if God forbid this is, you know, totally fails, here's what we're looking at. Like, how do we go about communicating effectively to middle managers, making sure they fully understand it, and helping them communicate that to their respective teams? What have you found to be effective in that?
I will start with this. Middle management is so key in the communication aspect of this because they are the ones that employees can most of the time touch and feel, right, on a day-to-day basis. So really ensuring those middle managers really understand really what the vision is, what's really going on. I think it starts with really making that as part of their goals, as part of their again, their evaluation to be middle managers, to be able to have to relay those messages. So middle managers, again, need to understand from their expectations, from their goal setting aspect, what that really means to them in terms of ensuring that the company mission, things that are going on in the organization are being carried out and being communicated the right way. From that standpoint, Garrett, I agree with you. When you, as that middle manager, really ensuring that you are very clear with your employees to understand what different levels mean. What does it mean if we exceed these numbers, for example, or we meet them, or we don't meet them? And really, what is our role as an organization? How can we make a difference? I do believe we need to be honest. We need to be transparent. We don't want to say things that we cannot back up. So I think from that standpoint, it's going to be very important for that manager, as we talk about leadership later on, to be able to really speak to those individuals, because everybody's value system is going to be different. You can have a very diverse team that you're managing. You can have someone who's just out of college. You can have someone who has, is really doesn't have college, maybe more high school from that standpoint in their education. You can have someone who's a senior individual. Those individuals have different value needs based on where they are in life. So again, it's really kind of ensuring that not only when you talk to your team, you talk to your individuals as a team, when you have those one-on-one conversations, really, again, being honest, being transparent, and understanding, again, some people may lean into it, some people may not. But I think it's important to really have the message. And again, I mean, it's good to be optimistic, but I think it's also good to be transparent. And again, making sure that middle management really understands their key role in really having that information and how to disseminate it to their respective teams.
Oh, yeah.
I just like, I was living what Christopher was saying, but again, and also if there is a culture of trust and of failure for people, that there's a level of middle managers they're not superheroes. They're not like gonna get it right away either. If it's the first time they're hearing something, we need to give them time to process that as well. Yes, they have more years of experience, but the first time any of us hear anything, and each of us takes information differently. And often in this rush world of jumping from one meeting to the next, if you are someone that's giving someone information for the first time, like your strategy, I mean, that's big. It shouldn't be like a really quick, rushed conversation. There should be time in that conversation for those middle managers to ask questions, to process it. Do they have the ability to workshop? Okay, now that you understand this, what does that mean for your team? What are some of your initial thoughts? Let's walk through that together. And that way you're also it's like that coaching mentality. It's helping that person be able to process the information, be able to kind of put some insight and feedback into that before they're asked to go then execute on it.
That is awesome. I was just about to ask a point on that, Mindy. So I think I'm so glad that you brought it up. On the topic of how to build a culture of accountability, how do we build a culture where middle managers are empowered to ask questions and clarify? I think sometimes as senior executives in an organization, we think we're optimistic about our own time. We think like, oh, this is how much time it's going to take for me to communicate what we're doing to all the middle managers, but not factor in how much time it's going to take for them to ask questions to clarify, why did you make these decisions and where are we going and how does this impact me? We think to ourselves like, gosh, I'm too busy. I got all these fires to put out. I got this meeting, that meeting. It's so easy to overcome that. How can leaders and executives, how can we as leaders become aware of this, audit ourselves, become more conscientious of not how long will it take for me to communicate this message to people, but how long it will take for them to fully understand?
So, in large organizations, you have many organization leaders, right? Many distributed organization, global, all these kinds of things. And so there's a lot of partitioning. So the communication channels which happen through one partition may not exactly be the same as other. And I also have found that it's very much personality driven, leader personality driven. Like the middle managers who are reporting into a certain vice president or senior vice president, it starts at that level to say how communicative am I going to be, how much time am I going to give to my next level management, and am I going to be reaching out, am I going to support them, the middle management, in communication to the employees by being part of certain communications. Because I've noticed at IBM, for example, right, irrespective of how well informed the middle manager is, when they communicate certain things, there is I won't say lack of trust, but a doubt about whether that's the full communication or not. So you need to be able to bridge that the support of the senior management has to be there behind the middle management, right? So I would say accountability is flowing both ways. And I'll give you a story. I don't know if this would relate back exactly to this point, but I was talking to a gentleman, one of our clients, from my past, senior vice president. About 10 years back, this happened, and I was talking to him about how to inspire teams and how to build larger teams and so on. And he said, I'll tell you my story. One of my previous jobs, I was the VP for the delivery organization, and every one of my projects were on time, and all of them were under cost. So I exceeded my goals for the year, my business goals, dramatically, and the profit margins were very high. And at the end of the year, when the CEO met with me, he asked me to resign and move away from the organization. And I was shocked. And I asked him why. I mean, I met my goals and I exceeded my goals. And he said, yes, but you have left a shambles of your team. Your entire team is burnt out and your team is disillusioned and many of them are leaving. So I'm going to have to rebuild a new team from the ashes that you're leaving behind. So that really calls out that as a senior leader, he realized that his accountability was not just to the business goals, but to the people that work with him in the entire organization, right? So to me, the team health, team dynamics is a key thing that a senior, if that doesn't start, it doesn't matter what processes we put in place. The soul, that heart, the intention is not behind it.
That's a really good story. Thanks for sharing that, Raghu. But I think one could even argue that even in that scenario, it's still on the executive of that middle manager to recognize, like, okay, great, you hit these numbers that we've never seen anybody hit in the history of our company. Congratulations, that's amazing. How's your team feeling? What's going on? If they truly are burnt out, it seems like it would make sense to have a conversations before the, hey, we're gonna have to ask you to resign moment, because like it seems like be an intermediary moment of like, hey, like, congratulations, you were super profitable, that's excellent, but your team is leaving and everybody is frustrated and everyone's burnt out. Like, it's okay if it takes a little bit longer for some of these things to happen, if it means your team's happier, more engaged, and not, stressed out about work, versus the, hey, we're gonna have to let you go because although your project came in on time and under budget, your people left, which is more expensive than having an on time and under budget project.
But that could be a interesting point, because again, if that team actually made those goals and overachieved at the time, again, from a leadership standpoint, that's the goal. That's where we were trying to get to. So what would be the alternative, right? If the team didn't make those goals and didn't meet those deadlines or timelines, and the team was actually happy or didn't feel burnt out, then where's the balance there? So I think it is really important from a messaging standpoint, from executives, is not only if we make those goals, but how we get there to meet them, right? So I think we need to make sure that the messaging is really clear, so middle management really understands really how to go about ensuring that not only are we going to make our goals, we're going to make sure we care for our people at the same time.
And that's really like being careful about what you measure, because what you measure is truly what you get. If you're only measuring, and if the organization really was only measuring revenue and that person hit revenue and they weren't expected to have team health, then that outcome, unfortunately, that happened, that I think that if you as an organization have decided to focus just on revenue, there are outcomes of that, which is burnout. And so is that the leader's problem? I don't know. Like, that's an organizational decision. You've asked people to be held accountable to revenue, not to team health. And so kind of what Chris was saying is how you get there is very important. So also how you measure and create clarity around success of what it means to be a middle manager, so that you would then have kind of probably signals along the way of burnout because you're measuring it. And this would probably have been an ongoing conversation that an executive would have been having and coaching that leader, saying, hey, I see you're hitting that revenue, but look at all of these other red flags. This isn't okay. We don't adopt this behavior in the organization. We would actually prefer you not to hit the number and have a healthy team. There's a way to balance, and it's different in each organization. And I think it all goes back to clarity and alignment.
Yeah, and I think organizations have become better over the last decade or so, have been improving in this aspect, right? People have realized that these soft goals, if you will, like the mental health of the employees, the well-being of the employees, the team health, all these things are important, and they're starting to add that into the at IBM, for example, you have the 139, right? Purpose, values, and practices. So there's a measurement tied back to these values and the practices. So there is an effort to do this, but I wanted to bring out the story because it's so critical. It doesn't matter if it's there in the goal or not. As a manager, as an executive, you are accountable. Whether we like it or not, you're accountable for the team, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I feel like more often than not, the opposite true is in organizations where people, or rather, where organizations, you hear a similar story to that where it's like, okay, someone and their team hits, great profitability numbers, great, they get their work done on time or even ahead of schedule. They're super profitable. Everything goes well. So the company says, great. Well, you hit that. Let's just ramp it up. Your numbers should be even 20% faster and 20% more profitable come this upcoming round. If you were able to become profitable that way, then I guess like let's keep bumping it up. It's I don't know, the analogy I have is this is a silly analogy, but it makes me think of intramural bowling in college. I took an intramural bowling class, and your grade was based on how your initial score was when you started bowling in the bowling class compared to what your end of semester bowling score was, not based on where you. So if you started at a 45 and then all of a sudden you were scoring 150 in bowling, you got an A. That's awesome. But if you started at 150 and you ended at 150, you got like a B maybe. And so I guess the point I'm making is that oftentimes in businesses, we are looking at, okay, if you hit the numbers we set for you, we're just going to keep ramping up the increase in your profitability, revenue, operational efficiency, whatever it may be. But there's not really a rhyme or a reason behind why those numbers or how those numbers were determined. How can we go about, I guess, managing back up to our executive team when we're putting out expectations that are just not reasonable or not achievable in terms of accountability?
I think that's where with the even small or larger companies with the business development strategy, when you are thinking about your strategy and setting those targets, you're not doing that in a silo or a vacuum. I mean, and yet, and the companies that don't do this well do it in a silo and vacuum and then just tell everyone, okay, now go do this. It should be a conversation with the line managers, with even the middle managers around, this is kind of where we're thinking about, based on the capacity of your team, what would you be able to do, or what would you be able to do with new technology, with more resources? Like, how we need to take the knowledge of our middle managers when and building the targets for the organization. And there's so many factors involved in this. I don't think I can speak to it intelligently, but it is a conversation that should be had, because the people that are running the teams, even those line managers, are the ones that are able to have some really tactical things to say of what actually is the capacity, what is possible or not in the current state that we're in. I think we often forget what is the current state of the business. And if we have a future desired state, we have to alter somehow that current state to bridge towards making that future state possible, especially if it's a greater goal. So what are the things that we're going to do differently to be able to make that possible?
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, the way I see it is, if we always start with what can my team do, you would never achieve the bigger, larger visions, right? The real transformative kind of visions in this industry, this world. But if you always start with the vision and this is where we are, maybe this is where I want to be, and I'm just going to push it down the throat of all the people, we're never going to get there either. And we're going to lose a lot of people in the process. So there is that aligning your vision, aligning the vision where we want to go to the realities on the ground, and then like the steps to bring the reality, upgrade that and bring it up to be able to deliver to that vision. Sometimes it may take a little longer than what I hope for as a visionary. Sometimes I may be able to get to it in sooner, right? But only time will tell that. So having that patience, having that care for the organization, for the people, while still believing in the vision and being passionate and driving it, I think that's key. And many of us lose sight of one or the other, right?
Mindy, you bring up this point about asking managers for what they need. And now I'm going to take the other side of the coin. I'm playing devil's advocate here. I want to look at all sides of the coin here. And I would care to argue that oftentimes people think they know what they need. And then once you give them what they ask for, it wasn't actually what they needed. And sometimes companies see that as excuses. I think oftentimes it's just lack of understanding of the situation. What we I think what oftentimes a lot of companies struggle with is you've got executives who are not in the weeds knowing what the actual problems is. And so they will say, okay, we're going to prescribe this tool or this resource for you to use however you need so then you can hit the numbers. And then there are people that are actually in the weeds, but they don't know everything that's in existence in the whole landscape. And they say, well, gosh, if I could have this or if I could have that, they could make my world a lot better. And it very well might work and it very well might not work. I don't know. But I think that there's a mismatch in terms of understanding what's available on the landscape and what people in the weeds and people who do know the landscape, the actual issues that people in the weeds are actually facing and what they need. How can we, what have you found to be good for bridging that gap? Does that question make sense?
It does. I think it really gets down to those middle managers really expressing that to leadership. It really, and not only, I mean, having the courage to do it, right? But really, not just being in a room when you're giving those goals from executives and just nodding their head. This having the courage to say, hey, we want to make this happen, but this is the reality on the ground. This is what our employees are saying. And that could be the form of engagement surveys. It could be the form of performance reviews or just having one-on-one coaching with your team. But I think it's very important for those middle managers to really express and really address those concerns of what's going on the ground level to make sure that the vision actually makes sense. Because as Raghu was saying, if the vision is just way over someone's head, it doesn't really touch them, then it's just going to be something empty and it's not going to be effective.
Yeah, and I look at it as like, see, when I was running the organization at IBM, it wasn't just about the teams that I have and what work can I get from them. That is very important. I talk to them, I get an understanding of that. But to reach the vision of my senior management, of my CEO, I can't just limit myself to that capability. There's a whole lot of capability in the world, right? So I could go out and get to a contracting firm, an outsource firm, bring some technology in and marry this and bring together something larger. So I think the role of the middle manager and the executives is not just focusing on the team and get more done from the team, but how can I get things done differently and to meet the vision. So, and I think if I can't do that, then I'm just a people manager. I'm not really an executive, right?
Right.
Right. And were they given the chance to actually inform that vision? Because often you'll hear middle managers will be like, well, I was just told to do this. I unfortunately didn't have a voice in this. And now this is what we have to go do, team. And we'll do the best that we can. So did you actually talk to your middle managers? Did they have a chance to give input and feedback? And if they don't know, and if it is trusted, they can ask questions like Chris was saying, and give them a chance to go find out. So if we don't know something, let's go have time to find out before we say, this is the plan.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It makes me think of like the dichotomy. If you ever seen like a startup founded by non-technical founders and then their product's very technical, it's very easy for a non-technical leader to be like, "Ooh, I think we should have an app for that. I think, CTO, can you just like build us just like for this one use case, like an app for this one client?" And then just obviously keep on all the other tech stuff that we need. Like it's easy, right? Apps, I have on my phone, you can just like click a button and there it goes. It works. Is that cool? And
Well, Gary, that's such a very important. We haven't really spoke about the health of the executive team, because I often find if you have a founder led or a very strong voice in that room, if you are running after all the shiny objects, that is meant to be a team for a reason. It's meant to be a team of experts to challenge and push on each other, to hold each other accountable and say, hey, that shiny object sounds really great. Help me understand how is that more important than what we're focused on right now? How is that a part of our vision or our plan? Help me understand why would help me. They just like to work it back, because we have visionaries, we need them, but we often don't think about operationalizing that shiny object. And so that executive team hopefully is you hired to the areas of that aren't your strength, so that you have them, so you don't have blind spots. So they need to be safe in being able to say, hey, I don't think that sounds good. I often find executive rooms are silent, and people then it's false harmony, false agreement, and they're truly not having courageous conversations.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Mindy, because I think you're spot on with that. I think that's something that and this all goes back to the culture element. This is why the topic's how to build a culture of accountability, because at the end of the day, people need to, in the organization, we need to have an organization where they're feeling psychologically safe or secure enough to say, ask a question, push back on the executive, understand. If it's a bunch of yes people, well then, a visionary is going to say, hey, we're going with the operational rollout strategy of GSD, get stuff done, figure it out. This is where we're going. Huzzah, row in the direction. And then, everyone's like, okay, cool, great. I love the GSD, pump up speech, but how actually are we getting stuff done? It's like, I don't know, figure it out. How can we go about building a culture where people feel comfortable, pushing back on those executive teams and like, hey, like, this is cool, but where does this slot in my priority list? I had these 3, 5 other things that I've been working on. How do we go about doing that?
So many of all the pieces that we've like talked about, I wish we had because we're kind of building a visual here, and the foundation that keeps coming back to is trust and psychological safety. And I think the first part, as a human, we need to really become self-aware of, do I have confidence in myself? Because often if we have scarcity of mindset, and we're not in a place of abundance and trust personally, that's really hard to then maintain an organizational of trust. There's so many elements that go into building and then maintaining that trust. And I think one of the equations I love is when your experience equals your expectations, that equals trust. And so how are we always kind of checking in on that? And then it's getting really clear then on the clarity and the alignment, and how are we bringing people, how are we hiring to our culture, because we already said being clear on okay, that's the KPIs. Are the KPIs just revenue focused? Are they also more around how we do the work? And then how are we building so that those expectations are down to the individual contributor? I also like to think about how are we all leaders? I think this is going back to Raghu didn't like accountability. And I agree, because we all own and we're all responsible for something. We all in some capacity lead something in the workplace. And so what at each level, what are those leadership competencies down to the individual contributor that help keep our values and our culture alive? I could talk, this is a whole nother like subject for an hour, but yeah, I think if you don't have trust, all the things we've talked about, they don't happen.
I think that's what it starts with. I think that's really the common denominator of this entire discussion. Because if you don't have trust, then you're not going to have that honest, that transparency, that feedback in order to get the desired results. And again, it really starts, and again, you're talking to a recruiting guy, it starts really from the evaluation process. How are we determining who will be our best employee, not just from a technical standpoint, but from the value standpoint, and ensuring that when we go through the evaluation process, that we're actually putting in place within the evaluation process how those individuals really how they communicate, what are their value systems, how do they communicate, so on and so forth, because building that foundation and also ensuring that managers that you have are trained to be able to deal with employees who are not who can be expressive, who are not afraid to really say what's going on. And again, that manager being able to articulate that and be able to present that to leadership at a point where, yes, we want to really make these goals, but this is really the voice of what our frontline people are saying and really following through with it. First thing you can do as a leadership team is, hey, we want to hear your feedback, but then when you get feedback from employees, you do nothing about it. Because you only get a couple of times, really one time to do that, and then all of a sudden everything you built from that standpoint, from trust, just goes out the window.
So I have a utopia in mind, like, something like a framework of self-accountability, team accountability, and organizational level accountability, right? And I'm glad Mindy and Chris talked about self and values. To me, self-accountability, every person, if not does, will hold themselves accountable to the values they hold. So if I believe I want to be a person of integrity, I want to be a person of commitment, sincerity, then I'll hold that dear to me. And if I can translate that to my workplace and my work and say, what does it mean? What is the relevance to my work? And I'm going to stay with that. And if anything is invading on that value system, then I would push back. Because if I don't push back, then I'm not being honest with my own value system. So while companies talk about company values, there's very little conversation in my mind on what is your value, employee, as you come on board, what is your value system? Are you even aware of what your value system is? Because many of us just drift through life without reflecting on that, right? So creating that awareness and then marrying that value system back. And I think that's where the team leaders and the skills of the team leaders, people managers need to have to go down into the value system of the employees. Am I honoring each person's value system? And I'm creating a team where the value system of the employees is aligned somewhat. There's enough diversity in the value systems, but there's enough alignment to my team goals, right? Team values, and hold myself accountable for that, right? And go up the chain at the organization level. So I think this is a brilliant topic. Culture of accountability makes a lot more sense to me than a framework for measuring accountability and punishing or rewarding accountability, which is important, but the culture is even more important.
Love it. Mindy, Raghu, Chris, this has been an awesome pre-symposium panel. For anybody who's watching this and wants to meet these three incredible leaders, come to our executive symposium next week, February 15th from 5 to 8 p.m. in Austin, Texas. It's going to be held at the Marketplace ATX on the corner of Anderson and Burnett. I can put the link to RSVP in the comments of this video, but we'd love to see you there. And Mindy, Raghu, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. This has been